So what an honor and pleasure. I feel so fortunate that that I have managed to track you, you who travel all over the world all the time, to put in one place and record this interview, because you have been a very, very important part of my life without necessarily knowing it. I'm so happy you're here. Welcome.
Well, I'm so grateful to finally see you again. It's been 14 years.
It has.
An interview, and so much has happened in that 14 years. So I'm so thrilled to be doing this, and delighted to see you again. You are looking so young and radiant, I must say. Whatever you're doing is working, because
it works.
It doesn't look like a thing has changed in these last years.
Good, I was just telling you the same. It was like I was struck when I saw you in Copenhagen. I was like, wow, it's 14 years ago and you still, shine. So what you, and I asked you, how, we were just talking about how come, so your eyes shine and you look the same as 14 years ago. So your method is working. And actually your method is what has made a big difference in my life and in the lives of countless other people. And that's why I invited you to come to this interview, because I thought anybody who doesn't know the journey yet, anybody who hasn't read the book, who hasn't come to the course, needs to know. So and we have the fortune that you travel to Europe as well many times, and you're coming to my part of the world. So we have to spread the good news.
Well, thank you.
We have to. I can just briefly say to the viewers that just to give you an introduction. So I got to know about your method, the journey, many, many years ago. I was still living in New York City.
Oh, right.
And yes, so it's more than, I moved back to Denmark 16 years ago. And what your method taught me was one of the main things it taught me was to experience my emotions. Oh. And so I have instead of running away from them or suppressing them or putting them on to other people. And I want to thank you, because that method came in so very, very handy when my son died. My 7-year-old son died 7 years ago. It has been handy in many cases, but when I experienced big, big grief, what a blessing to know of a method where you can allow the emotions to take you deep down in your well of wisdom and bring that wisdom with you. So here I am, after a tragedy and still having a happy life. And I think your method has been a very important part of it. So thank you for that.
Oh, I'm shocked to hear it, and also grateful that during such, they say there's no greater pain than losing a child, and that you were able to open and welcome the grief and even open deeper into that pain, into the peace that's in the core of all suffering. That is, revelation in and of itself. And I really honor you and blown away by the healthy way that you allowed that natural process to happen, and the peace and joy that you found since that time.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important that we all know that method, because why are we not taught in school to deal powerfully with our emotions? After all, our emotions is like a part of our everyday life all the time. So should be mandatory. And speaking of, we need to know how you found that method. And I know that you also found that through actually a tragedy in your life, through illness, through suffering, which is interesting for all of us to notice that in the biggest crisis lie the gem, the gold that we can dig out. And you found some gold that you have shared all over the world. So please, I know you've told that story a zillion times, but we have to hear, how did the journey method come about?
Well, originally it came about when I was 39 years old. I'm 65 now. And I ended up being diagnosed with a basketball-sized tumor. And I was already in the health field and in the healing field and the personal transformation field. And it was the last thing I ever expected to have happen to me. And part of the gift of my own healing journey, and I healed in 6.5 weeks' time, is I found a means for all of us to go on our own healing journey deep inside to certain cellular locations. And one of the things we know about the emotions is that science has found that when you feel a strong emotion and you repress it, it releases a quantifiable biochemistry into your bloodstream, which will go to certain cell receptors and block them, rendering those cells incapable of communicating with the rest of the cells in the body. And if over time illness happens, it happens where the cells are blocked. And conversely, what's also known to be true is that when we feel our emotions openly and freely, very naturally, like a child does, our cell receptors remain open and they can watch this in a laboratory. And so part of the gift of my own healing journey is I found a means for all of us to go inside and literally uncover these blocked cells. And the cell memories that are stored in you, that old repressed pain, the shame, the blame, the hurt, all of that we experienced at the time, and no one gave us a manual how to deal with that pain. And so what do? We did what most of us do when something big happens, something strong happens in our life, we shut down. And then that biochemistry is released, goes to the cell receptors and blocks them. And what the journey is it takes you inside to those blocked cells to uncover the stored pain there, to release what's stored there, to understand what's taken place in your life, and ultimately to forgive, so that you can finally let go of the whole cell memory, the consciousness, so that when new cells are born, they're born devoid of that old consciousness as new regenerative cells. And so since my own healing journey, I never knew it would end up being a method that's being used around the world. And right now we offer seminars in 39 countries, and it's also translated into 24 languages. And so people all around the world are using the journey to heal their lives, both physically and emotionally. And like in your case, when something happens and we don't have the tools to deal with it, the journey gives you gentle, very powerful work that gets radical results and can bring you home to the peace inside yourself. So that was originally my story from a long time ago. And obviously the work has evolved over the time, expanded, gotten more user-friendly. And since that original book, The Journey, was written, I've written 6 books in total. And so it's to give everyone the method so that they can undergo their own healing journey.
I find it so extraordinary. It really taught me to not be afraid of emotions. It taught me to stay with whatever emotion and allow that emotion to transform and to show me a different path. So it's really such a revolution because actually many of us grew up with a very rational mindset and not considering emotions something important. But emotions rule our life if we don't take care of them in a proper way. So it's very, very necessary to do. I know that I actually have told all my students. I teach leadership training. I had to do leadership training, and all my students know about your work. And I have told them that it has traveled like a fire. All over the world. Can you tell us a little bit about, so you find this method many years ago, and then you started giving seminars in your living room, and you saw that other people also experienced miracles. Yes. So I'd like to hear in this time, can you give us some examples of some of the results you've seen from using this method?
Well, it's not just physical. In the beginning, it was quite miraculous, as you said, to witness people undergoing their own journeys. And usually it wasn't after one journey, but after, some journeys over some months of time, people have healed from all kinds of things like heart disease and Crohn's disease and brain tumors and They've healed from arthritis, eczema, asthma. I mean, pretty much you can name it. Lyme's disease. They've used the journey. And what I always recommend with people, I started out, as you said, in my living room, but very quickly it ended up, traveling around the world once the book was written. And then I got invited to speak in cancer centers by, medical profession, because though they were still using chemotherapy, people would be undergoing chemotherapy, but they'd also use the journey while they were getting the chemotherapy. It's intravenous. That's why I'm holding up my hand. They'd close their eyes and get a physical journey to get to the emotional corollary of what was part of co-creating the illness in the first place. And I can remember I was in Byron Bay, and just to make this very, very practical, I ended up having a scuba diving accident. Rushed to the hospital. They put a mask over my face, and they were taking a gurney and running me through the halls. And the doctor looked in my eyes. He said, "Oh my God, you're Brendon Bays." He said, "I keep many copies of your book in my private practice." And he said, "Someone keeps coming to me, and they're always getting migraines. They're always got some sort of chronic colds all the time, or some sort of allergy." He says, "I know not everything can be fixed with a pill. I know that probably something's going on at home." And that I say to them, "Listen, I don't teach this method. I haven't learned how to do it, but read the book and see, if it appeals to you, do the method at the back of the book and see if that can help you get to the emotional corollary, what is co-creating your physical symptoms." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you very much," under the oxygen mask. But I think the reason doctors are so open to using the journey is because the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has put on its website that it feels that 85% of all illness has an emotional basis. And the reason they can say this is because of all the work they're doing in the field of cellular healing. And so they're very grateful, actually, for work that can help people do this work alongside the wonderful work that they're doing. So often I'm speaking at integrative medical conferences, with medical doctors about how to incorporate this work alongside whatever work they're doing with what they have learned in the medical field. And I always say to them, do not give up all the teaching you've learned. Just feel free to use this, because our emotions do contribute. They know this scientifically to the physical illnesses. And so, of course, over the years, working with doctors and with ministries for education, they were using this in schools. And the reason I share this is because, people think, "Oh my God, my emotions, what do we do?" Most of us, we feel our emotions. It's like we feel an emotion. Smoke it away, drink it away, get on Facebook, get on Google, surf the net, call a friend, watch a movie, go to the movies, almost anything but feel our emotions. And actually the emotions are the gateway to your own soul. It's deep in the core of any strong emotion. You will find a vast field of peace, of stillness, that is your own essence. And I was working with the Ministry of Education in Israel, and I originally got invited to Israel by the rabbis of the Jewish tradition. And they felt that this healing work should be in every Jewish household because it's also a teaching of forgiveness. And they felt that it was something that belonged in every Jewish household. So the Ministry of Education, the head minister, she found out about the journey, underwent the whole practitioner's program, and then said, "I would like for our whole ministry to experience this." But she did something very different than the other ministries of education that I've worked with. Usually when I've worked with other ministries of education, they've had me train the teachers who then give this work to the children on a regular basis. But she said, "We're not willing to have our children undergo this work unless we in the government have experienced it." And so she asked that there be a year-long training that was offered to the Ministry of Education. And at the end, there was a year of this year-long training. She got 40 of the ministers together. So the Minister of Finance, the Minister of High Schools, of grade schools, of guidance counselors. So the heads of all the different areas for the school system in Israel. And there were 40 of them together in a big circle. And I went to the ministry buildings in Tel Aviv. And she said, Brendon, I don't want you to speak. I just like to begin with for you to hear everyone else's experience. And one woman had shared that even without drugs or surgery, she healed from breast cancer using the journey. And another woman was sharing that she went through a very acrimonious divorce, but she came through it feeling at peace with her own self and felt it was a very conscious way that they ended up parting ways. But the one that touched me the most was the one who had an emotional issue. And because many of them shared that they had had physical issues that are now finished with. And she said, you know, Brendon, I don't have a physical issue. She said, I just have so much anger in my life. She said, I've been walking these ministry halls for 18 years, and I have been so stressed out. I'd gotten to a point in my life where I had started to hate my life, hate myself. I come home at night from being stressed out in this government building every day for 18 years. I have 8 children, and of course they're trying to replace those lost during the Holocaust. And she said, I have to cook the meals for 8 children and my husband, and then of course the children arrive late at dinner. I spend my whole time at dinner shouting at my children that they're eating cold food, and that when I ask them to come to dinner, they should come to dinner. And she said, and the next day I'd wake up and it's just more of the same. And she said, I started to hate myself. And I just spent my life in anger. I go to a committee meeting here in the governmental buildings, and all I do is argue. And we'd make an appointment so we could have another committee meeting so we could argue some more. And she said, the first time I did my journey process, she said, I got to the emotional root cause of what was driving my surface anger. And that day, I cleared it out at that deepest level, and I finished with it. And she said, that night I went home, my kids were late for dinner again. And I thought, who cares? Who cares if they're late for dinner? So they eat cold food. It's still good food. And she said, my youngest, who is 8 years old, she said to me at the end of dinner, she said, Mommy, where did all the anger go? And she said the next day I got into the offices in this building, and I went to the committee meeting, and I looked in everyone else's eyes, and I could see that they were shining. We got more done in that committee meeting than we got done in the last 10 committee meetings. And she said, because we'd all cleared it out at that deepest level, at the level of the infinite intelligence, at the level of the soul. And she said, when you clear it out at that deepest level, your surface emotion doesn't even make any more sense. And so I loved her sharing, because she's speaking all of our story. And, you know, if I had to say, what is the journey in a nutshell, the best way I could describe it is to say that we, all of us, come into this world as this radiant, shining diamond, absolutely whole, completely free, where we feel ourselves to be one with all of existence, with all of life. As a matter of fact, science has found that when we are born and in the first few weeks of our life, the infant feels itself to be this vast field of love, of peace, of oneness. And when mother's hand comes before its eyes, it actually experiences mother's hand as being part of itself. That's how vast this love is, where we feel part of the all of existence. But unfortunately, this radiant love this vast awareness, this enlightened awareness that we came in as, it gets covered over with a series of lies, pain, and shutdown. And it can be something very easy, like you're 3 years old and you're crying about something, and your mother says, come. We've got to dry our tears. We've got to get you to the daycare center, off to kindergarten. And suddenly the little kid gets it. Oh, I'm not allowed to feel, at least not the emotions that have tears. And the first involuntary, internal shutdown happens. Or I can remember I was 8 years old, and for those that have read the book, you know, I came from a very domestically, brutally violent background. And part of the way I used to escape was into my children's books. And of course, when you love something as much as I loved reading, you become good at it. And so I became a good reader and a speller. And when I was 8 years old, I got chosen for kind of a stupid contest that we have in the United States called a spelling bee. And we got all the schools in the whole county together into a stadium. And so all the school teachers, all the students, all the parents were in this stadium. And I'd been chosen to represent the third grade, the 8-year-olds. And I was on stage. And I spelled already 3 difficult words. And then they gave me one of the easiest words in the English language, the word fleet. Well, no one had given me I'd never seen a book that had the word fleet in it. And I had seen the word flea, an insect, right? And I stood there and said, F-L-E-A-T? And the whole stadium was hushed. And then it erupted into laughter. Mm. And no one had given me a manual. How do you deal with that kind of mass humiliation in front of your friends, in front of all the parents, all the school teachers? And I looked at my mom, and she was sitting in the third row in the audience because the parents were given the best seats. And I looked to her for support, and she just shook her head as if I was the greatest disappointment in her life. And she went,
oh my God.
And internally, this wall just came slamming down inside of myself. And I went to go stand at the back of the stage with the other losers. And that day I decided I was so stupid that all anyone would ever do was laugh at me, that I'd never be good at anything. And this shutdown just happened. And we have layer upon layer of these shutdowns. I can remember I was 16 years old, and I tried to impress a crush. I had a crush on a boy, and it was the first crush I ever had. And I tried to impress him. And of course, you try to impress someone, you make a total fool of yourself. And I watched the first love of my life literally running out of my life, and I was running after him. And of course that day, I decided I was so unattractive, I was so unlovable, that no one I was attracted to would ever love me, that I was just not lovable. I was not worthy of love. I didn't deserve love. And it's like this in life, layer upon layer upon layer. And then when we get to be adults, this whole mess is covered over with this polished veneer that we present to the world, where we're saying to the world, it's okay, I'm an adult, I'm reliable, dependable, you can count on me. And, we're putting that out to the world. And then we wonder why it is everyone thinks we're so full of, and you can finish that sentence. And then if you get to be very lucky, I have been more lucky than I could possibly thank life, the universe for. Life gives you a wake-up call. Now, these wake-up calls can come in so many forms. In the form of a loss of a loved one, as you experienced, or someone goes off to war, or a very difficult divorce. In my case, it came in the form of a serious illness with that basketball-sized tumor. And it's where for one moment you decide to get real. And you crack through this polished veneer, this false identity, this mask that you've been presenting to the world. And you end up opening spontaneously down through the layers of the lies and the pain and the shutdowns and the blocks. And eventually, if you keep opening, as you said so beautifully, you end up opening into a vast, boundless field of love, of peace, of freedom. And you feel yourself to be part of and in everything. And you realize that this field of love, this peace has been there all along. Only like me, you bought into all the layers that covered it and blocked it. And then if you get to be very lucky, you fall so in love with the truth inside yourself, with the love that is your essence, with the freedom that you came in as, that your soul is, that like me, you will do anything to clear whatever blocks you, whatever obscures you, whatever has shut you down in your life. So this radiant love that is your essence, that is your soul, can live your life. So if I had to say, what is the journey really all about? It's about getting real. It's about cracking through this phony, false veneer, this false identity that we're projecting to the world, and opening through the layers of the lies and shutdowns. And eventually you open into your own soul, which you experience as an enlightened awareness that's part of all of existence. And it's at that deepest level, at the level of the soul, that you turn the torch on, the flashlight on inside. And you go in a journey inside your body. You're guided by that infinite intelligence, by your own soul. And you uncover these old repressed cell memories that are stored inside. And you go through a radical process of release and letting go and understanding what's happened in your life. Ultimately, forgiveness. And so when new cells are born, they're born devoid of that old consciousness as new regenerative cells. And so that's what the journey really is all about.
And that's why it's a big fortune that you travel the world. You give these 3-day workshops, right, where we can experience the physical journey, or the journey on a physical issue, and then the journey on an emotional issue.
Yes.
So that's like a 3-day event experience where people actually try out the process and also get a training in how to deliver it to others, right? You take shifts at, maybe you don't get a certification, but you get the experience, right, of giving this to someone else, which is also useful. I give it to my children and my husband and so on, right?
Yeah. The 3-day journey intensive is very different now than when you took it. It's a real deep immersion in the latest up-to-minute work. And you're in process after the first hour, most of the first day. And the second day, as you said, working on the emotional issues and the physical issues. But on the third day, we start working with issues that get passed on to us generationally. We start working with issues that are stored in our DNA. And the first time I went to Germany, there was this man there who, when he did his physical journey, he went inside his heart, and the cell memory that was stored there wasn't his own. It was his mother's, and she was in during the Holocaust, she was in the concentration camps. Now, like in my situation, my mother's Austrian, and she was there, and her former husband was shot down by the Luftwaffe, and her father was put into a Nazi prison and shot through the head. And she ended up marrying an American soldier and going to America. And of course, I was born in New York. But she went what is called stumm. In German, that means we don't talk about this. And I knew nothing about my mother, not my grandfather's name, not about her former husband. I knew nothing about my mother's life before she came to America. And this man was the same way. He said he was born post-World War II like me, and his mother went shtum. We don't talk about the concentration camps. And when he went inside, sometimes the cell memories you uncover aren't your own. And it had been, through his DNA, it had been cellularly passed on to him. And he went through the process of the journey of releasing and letting go all of her stored pain that had been passed on to him cellularly, and came to complete release and letting go and forgiveness. But he said, Brandon, this is the first time I've known what my mother experienced in those concentration camps. And he said, but even though I never knew before until this moment, he said, it's like I've had this lid over my life. And he said, it's like because I was born post-World War II, I did not have permission to really fully live life fully. I couldn't be crazy and fun-loving. And, it's like I had this lid over my life. And I asked, there were 240 people in the room, and I asked, how many of you feel that way? And every one of them raised their hand. And I looked at my life, and I had grown up in a country that was supposedly all about freedom. But I realized I'd grown up with a lid over my life, and that I was coming to Europe not only to serve in the healing and awakening there, but for my soul's own healing journey. And as a matter of fact, I get a journey process once a week when I'm on tour.
Wow.
Yeah, I never want to be so arrogant to say that I've got it all handled. I know there's more than one cell memory stored inside this body, and I feel it's a privilege to clear whatever block that obscures me or holds me back on any level. And so the reason I'm sharing this right now is the third day of the Journey Intensive. We're going to start going after what's stored in our DNA, some of the issues that were passed on to us generationally from our forebears, from our ancestors, and clearing out some of the family themes that we've been carrying. And all I can say is at the end of this deep immersion in grace, in this love, you leave feeling washed clean, completely whole. And yes, it is my prayer that you then go to your children, to your grandparents, to your parents, and give this work away. Just help take the lampshade off your family's life, off your friend's life. It is my prayer that you learn them so deeply that you can use this method not only on yourself on a weekly basis, but with other people. And so that you can help people to liberate their lives and to come home to the love that is their essence. So I'm really excited that I'm going to be coming to Stockholm to give an intro coming up soon. And also in Denmark, I'm going to be giving the 3-day immersion in grace. So I'm going to be in your part of the world giving the Journey Intensive. And then also I'll be coming back, I think it's September, October time of this same year, coming to Stockholm for the first time in many, many years. I got pulled around the world to some of the countries who could never get access to this kind of teaching. And so I'm so thrilled to be coming back to Stockholm and to be with all my journey beloveds and to dive in again with this very brand new, fresh, and very deep immersion for the 3-day Journey Intensive.
I am so impressed that you have been so much in integrity with your method that since you discovered it, you have not stopped sharing it for one moment. I mean, it's so dedicated, and I think this leadership it's beautiful to witness it have its effect. I would love if you could share where this is used, because I know that the journey is used in South African schools, in hospitals, in prison. I mean, tell us a little bit about where has this been
Well,
spreading?
we have a humanitarian organization called Journey Outreach, and we've had over 100 projects around the world. And we've had projects with indigenous communities, so like the Aboriginals in Australia, the Maoris in New Zealand, over 100 projects in the whole African continent, and South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Zambia, Namibia, Kenya. And we have been working with the First Nations people in North America. So with the Canadian, original people that were originally there, they have had it passed by the government. So they're using this work to clear some of the abuse, the addictions issues that, pretty much their land was taken from them. And in the 1950s, a terrible thing happened where in America, Canada, and Australia, in the 1950s, it was decided that the First Nations people were not capable of being good parents. And so all the children were taken away.
Oh my God.
And brought up in white schools in the big cities. Now, you can imagine as a mother what that would feel like. And the amount of rage and, of course, reaction to that rage is the amount of addiction and abuse and drug abuse and substance abuse and all kinds of abuse that happens. And so the elders of the First Nations community in Canada got governmental dispensation, and there's ongoing projects happening there all the time. We're also working with orphanages in India. There was one little girl who's really my inspiration. She was from a middle-class family, but the father died. And that meant that the mother had to try to make a living any way she can, and she had to turn to the streets and become a lady of the night, which meant that, she suddenly from middle caste completely into the untouchable. And she was stabbed to death in the streets, and this 5-year-old little girl, she managed to get her mother into a cart and tried to drag her to the local hospital, and got some help from street kids to drag her there to the steps. But when they looked at the mother, they said, no, she's an untouchable. She's an Adivasi. They're not allowed in the hospital. And she watched her mother bleed out on the streets in Delhi. And she couldn't speak from then forward. And so there's an orphanage there. With several orphanages that we work, where we've trained the social workers there in the journey work. And we were first approached by this orphanage because he said, I've got shelter for the children. I've got food for the children, but they have experienced such trauma that they lie awake at night. They can't close their eyes because they know when they close their eyes what they're going to see. And they're called train children because he picks them up in the train station where their parents leave them. They can't care for them anymore. And he said, I have their physical needs taken care of. What I need is emotional tools. And so Pooja, when I first met her, she looked hollowed out and vacant in her eyes. I met her when she was 8 years old, 3 years after it had happened. And by the time I met her the next time, 2 years later, she had filled out, was blooming, had shining eyes, and she was learning to sing, to dance. She started being very scholastically intelligent at school, and she was shining. And so for me, I feel if people's physical needs are being taken care of, then every single soul needs to have these tools to liberate their lives and come home to a sense of peace and well-being, which is what the journey is all about. So I feel very invested in these programs. As a matter of fact, some of these orphanages are actually written into my will so that if anything happens to me, we can carry on doing the work. in some of these orphanages. And so it's extraordinary to watch the children be potentialized. Now, obviously, Journey Outreach has been used in prisons and by ministries of education around the world. But it's really people who would never get this work, couldn't afford a book, let alone get this teaching, who are my inspiration. And that's why we give this work away to them around the world. And so, yes, it's being used all around the world. And what I've learned, it really doesn't matter your cultural background. It doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are. It doesn't matter what kind of schooling you've received. Everyone is capable of coming home to this infinite intelligence, to this vast, boundless presence of peace inside. And everyone is capable of taking the lampshade off their light.
And you know what? I think that this method, it's not a coincidence that it comes about at this time, because that's, it is such a crucial part of waking up to our full potential as human beings, waking up to our heart consciousness, waking up to oneness, all that wants to happen in this area, with climate crisis and the refugee. I mean, there's so many crises that we can only solve in community if we help each other, if we wake up. So it's so beautiful it's a God's gift that some of the keys to this consciousness, or a master key to awaken, is given, and you pass it on with such diligence. I totally, from the deepest part of my heart, honor your work. I am so grateful that you have been so unstoppable, because you could have kept it to yourself.
Sorry?
You could have kept it to yourself.
I could have. But you know what happens when you nearly die from something?
Yeah.
And you healed against the odds without drugs or surgery. After that time that the tumor happened, I realized that every day that I live is a day that I might not have had. Mm. And there's just been this overwhelming gratitude to be allowed to breathe, to live life. And I believe I am here, and that this is a calling to serve life, to bring awakening, not as an idea, but as a direct living experience to people, and the tools for healing their lives. And obviously the journey has been widely known now as being a tool for liberation, a tool for awakening to your own divine potential in a direct, experiential way, and also as a tool for healing every area of your life in a very, again, direct, practical, and experiential way, not as some pretty aphorisms, some lovely, wise ideas. I always feel that it's not about finding the guru on the outside. It's about discovering the master within. I believe that that guru exists within all of us, and the journey gives you access to that. Only you can know what's stored inside of you. Only you can do the work to clear whatever blocks you, whatever obscures you, whatever holds you back on any level of being. And only you can heal your life. And so I feel that the whole reason I breathe, that I'm here, is to serve life in awakening and healing. And so, yes, there's a huge, not just dedication, but passion.
Yeah, it's very felt. Every time you speak, I'm like, oh, now you have to tell the whole story again, but you do it as if you told it for the first time. It's always with such passion. I really hope that some of the decision makers of the world are listening to this. I hope that some company leaders, some educational leaders, some health leaders are listening to this, because we could save so much money and so much effort
Yes.
if we had more awareness of the variety of tools, and not just,
Yes.
just trying to solve our new problems in the old ways. So I hope that people of influence are listening to this and taking it to heart. I just want to, mention this before we end, because I am part of the population that tried everything to heal my son, including the journey. I did the journey on him, I did it on me, on his father. We did all kinds of miracle things. And actually, my son did not die of cancer. He died of a side effect from one of the healing modalities we had used. But I just want to talk a little bit about, just very briefly, about, some people don't heal. And what I see in this era of new consciousness is that then some people feel terribly guilty that they were not able to heal. And when my son died, I felt, oh my God, did I do something wrong? Was I not good enough? So could you just speak a little bit about this? We do know now that many illnesses have an emotional component, but could you also speak about sometimes where we might not be, it might not be our soul's journey to heal. Sometimes we might move on. So I just think it's an important part, because I feel terrible for all these people with cancer and illnesses that don't heal and feel ashamed. Why don't I heal?
When illness happens, the journey is not the way. It's a way that can be used. We had a woman who was riddled with cancer, and she spent a year doing everything natural and a journey once a week. And a year later, she got the all clear. She got, I'm completely clear. And 3 days later, got bumped off by a bus and killed. And I believe that no one ever goes 1 second before their time. And that we can't play God. That if it's the soul's destiny to heal, the journey or some other thing will work. And if it isn't, if part of the illness is part of what their soul had to learn in this lifetime, then you can do everything on the planet, and it wasn't the destiny to heal. And people often ask me, I go into very dangerous situations, into ghettos, like I'll have in Africa, where I'll have 5 white police cars taking me and my team into the middle of a 3 million person ghetto. And then we'll be met by, 5 police cars with black policemen in it, and taken into the ghetto and to work with inner city children. And people ask me, how could you put yourself in so much danger? And I always say the same thing. I don't believe that I will die until the exact moment I am meant to die. And so if I'm not meant to die there, I won't. And if I am meant to die there, then I will. So I don't believe that I can stave off death, or I can play God with the journey. It's why medical doctors like working with the journey, because we're not saying use this instead of whatever method you want to use. We're just saying use it alongside of whatever chosen method you've chosen. And ultimately, if none of the methods work, chemotherapy, radiation, journey work, there is a way in which, in my direct experience, I believe it was not their time to heal. It was their time to go. There's this medical report in case studies of 10,000 case studies of people who healed what is called, in medical terms, spontaneously. They have this medical textbook in the United States. And there's one woman who was in a hospice, and she was expected to die within the next day. And so a hospice is a place where, when there's nothing more the medical field can do for you, they let you to be made comfortable so that you can pass comfortably. But there's nothing more that can be done for you. She was in her 70s. She woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this bright light. And she felt it was like it entered her molecules, was the only way she could describe it. And when this light came into her body, she got the knowing, I don't think it was through words, but somehow the knowing that it wasn't her time to go, that she had a purpose in being here. And she actually heard the words arise in her awareness. It is not your time to go. The next morning, she's in hospice. They end up doing all of her tests, and they can find no evidence of any cancer. And she lived another 12 years.
Wow.
Because life needed her for whatever reasons. So I can't know the mystery of life. I certainly don't know the mystery of death. But I do know that if you're meant to be around, the journey and many other beautiful methods can be used by the soul. And if somehow the body's meant to go, you can use all the methods on the planet, and it's going to go.
Yeah, I remember the people said to me, I was in touch with some Tibetan lamas who said to me, you can't stop a soul who's scheduled to go back. And that was very healing for me to hear. But still, I believe that all the work we did, including the journey, during my son's 6 months illness with incurable cancer, was a cleanse, and it was certainly fantastic for me to know afterwards I did everything in my power to save his life. So I do still believe that anybody who gets the opportunity to check the journey through the book, or preferably through a course, should absolutely. It feels to me like this is a tool that should be in everybody's toolbox, so you have it, and especially for a rainy day. But also in relationships, that I really use it often also in my relationship, to not be afraid of emotion, not be afraid of a strong emotion. It's okay to have an emotion. It's energy emotion. Yes. The problem is if it blocks us, or if it stops, or if it stifles us, or if it keeps us small. Yes. That's the problem.
Yes. Well, if we repress it, or run from it, or avoid it, or reframe it, that when that repression happens, it releases that biochemistry into our bloodstream, which does go to the cell receptors and block them. And all that the journey enables you to do, in addition to opening into your infinite intelligence, into the love that you are, the peace that is here, is it gives you that method to go to that cellular location, uncover the stored pain that you couldn't face at one point, and go through that radical process of release and letting go and understanding and forgiveness, so that programming does not get passed on to the next cell generation. And so it is a tool that can be used in your life for dealing with everyday things that all of us face and clear.
Yeah, and also for not passing on the illnesses to your kids through the DNA.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. So much of the work we're doing these days is with the DNA. That's why I wanted to share that with you. For the Journey Intensive, we will be on the 3rd day doing that DNA work. So even deeper work, the consciousness. And if you just Google it online, they're saying that right now, the consciousness that took place, the science is saying this, in World War II has absolutely been passed down to the future generations. So all of us have that stored inside of us. And the journey just gives you the method to finish with it, so that legacy of pain and suffering is not passed on to the next cell generation.
So many reasons to do the journey, and thank you so much for sharing them. And I hope that the people who listen to this will not have any doubt whatsoever in their mind that this is a very, very useful method. So I thank you so much for your time, Brendon, and I look forward to seeing you in person. Of course, I will have to show up at one of your courses and get them the updated version of this beautiful method. So Thank you so much. beautiful soul. Thank you for your work for humanity. I am so grateful.
Thank you so much. And many blessings in your beautiful work.
Thank you.